It's 8:05, a year after Cumbria elected the county's first ever police and crime commissioner. More than a third of people still don't know if they actually have one or not. That's according to a survey for the BBC this morning. The new commissioners replaced police authorities with a single figure overseeing the way the police are run. But they were elected by a historically low turnout. Here in Cumbria, less than 16% of people actually voted. Mike Tong is the head of the Institute for Policing and Criminal Justice Studies at the University of Cumbria.
And the idea behind this in the first place from the government was to get greater public engagement in policing. And if you think back to November last year, when a lot of people were forecasting very low turnouts, these people have been elected on a very, very low mandate, less than 15% of the public turnout to vote. So in getting off to a good start, that wasn't a good start. If you look up and down the length and breadth of the country, there have been some excellent examples of good practice from the police and crime commissioners, but equally some less so. And I think it's a patchwork quilt at the moment. They're a quarter of the period through their office, so I think the jury is still out as to whether it's made a huge difference to policing in this country.
Well, more than half of the people who did vote in Cumbria chose the Conservative-backed candidate Richard Rhodes. A year into the job, he says he's working hard to improve understanding of what he does.
I've made a huge attempt to get out into the highways and byways, as it were, to explain to people what I do. And certainly in terms of public engagement, over the last 12 months, I've conducted well over 60 sorts of events of one kind or another in which I meet with the public and use those opportunities to explain the whole function of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Well, Richard Rhodes will be joining me in the hot seat tomorrow morning. You can hear that on BBC Radio Cumbria from 11:30. Joining me now, though, to reflect on his first year in office are John Stevenson, the Conservative MP for Carlisle, and Paul West, the former Chief Constable of West Mercia, who now runs a not-for-profit organisation called Policing for All, which provides independent advice for police and crime commissioners. John Stevenson, let's start with you. What do you think of Richard Rhodes' first year in the job?
I think he's done a reasonably good job. It's early days. We've only had 1 year of the police commissioners. I think it's a vast improvement on what we had before, which was the police authority, which I think nobody had ever heard of. Nobody knew who the members of it were. It is in line with my thinking, which is direct democracy. It's about localism. And we now have somebody who is elected by the local people to have an influence on our policing.
But you say no one had heard of the local police authority. Only, what was it, 16% turned out. A third of people don't even know if they have a police or crime commissioner.
Clearly, I was disappointed with the turnout at that election, but to be perfectly honest, I'm disappointed that only 30% vote at local elections. I'm disappointed that only 65% vote at a general election. But the important thing is, everybody who's entitled to vote had the opportunity to vote. It's up to them whether or not they decide to do so. And I think come the next PCC elections, I think there'll be a substantial increase in the turnout.
Paul West from Policing for All. What did you make of Richard Rhodes' first year in charge?
Good morning, Mike. Well, I sort of speak nationally in a sense, and I wouldn't want to address directly Richard Rhodes' personal performance, but I recognise a lot of what John Stevenson's saying there and would agree with that. However, I think that there is an issue about the size of the constituencies that the Police and Crime Commissioner is expected to engage with, because the idea of being local, elected by local people, how local is the county of Cumbria? How local are some of the other areas, which are huge, with several million constituents, much larger than parliamentary constituencies. So I think it's a huge challenge for any one individual to effectively engage with the communities, the very varied communities, and for that matter, for those communities to feel that here is somebody who we can relate to at a local level, a truly local level.
Paul, there's been a lot of negative headlines, especially about expenses. Do you think Richard Rhodes has become well known for the wrong reasons?
Well, I listened to the Vox Pop earlier on, and I imagine had there been a positive comment that you could have drawn out, you'd have done that in order to be balanced. So, that was interesting, just a snapshot of people in the street, but clearly that's the issue that they remember. And I'm afraid nationally that is the publicity around Mr. Rhodes. Now, he has another 2.5 years to do what many other police and crime commissioners are now doing, which is coalescing around key national policy issues, whether it be mental health in the police, the needs of victims, police misconduct, the investigation of complaints against the police. There are a number of very key strategic issues that several commissioners are really making a difference on. And it's that sort of, yes, doing the role locally very effectively, but also contributing nationally to the whole policing future. I think that's a way in which commissioners can really show their worth to the local people and, for that matter, to the nation as a whole.
John Stevenson, could he have handled things better, Richard Rhodes?
Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, we've got to move on from that. I think he handled
but we are reflecting on the past 12 months, and that was one of the things which has dominated his first year in office.
I accept that, but I still think you have to move on. You've got to look to the future. It's only 1 year in now. I think Richard is already starting to make a difference in other areas. For example, alcohol and rural crime strategy. He's introduced the Office of Victim Services, and as we saw recently, the local Labour Council have got rid of CCTV. He's come back with some innovative ideas of how that can still be reintroduced, and that is very strongly supported by local people. So he had a bit of a bumpy ride at the start, but I think Richard is a quality PCC. I think he is somebody who is learning on the job and is starting to make an improvement.
How about the next 3 years? What should his priorities be for the remaining term of office for him, do you think?
Well, I think he'll probably comment on what his ideas are tomorrow, but I think he's got to ensure that we continue with the low crime environment that we do have in Cumbria, and sometimes I think we forget that. We are very, very fortunate that we do live in a part of the country where crime is generally low. He's got to continue to ensure that there's confidence for the local people in the police force, which I think is very, very important. And to be fair, the police have taken a bit of a knocking nationally on one or two issues recently. So I think it's very important that Richard supports the police, but he also gives them direction and gives them a strategy which they have to follow.
Paul, what do you think the priority should be for the next 3 years?
Well, I hear everything that John said, and I would agree entirely. It's about more of the same and more new things, new ideas to really move policing on. But there's another group that I think really need to step up to the mark in this whole new environment, and that's the group called the Police and Crime Panel, whose role it is to hold commissioners to account. In the past, whatever their failings, there was a group of people, the police authority, and there were checks and balances within that where, different views could be taken into account and a consensus would emerge. Here, it's a rather unique situation where you've got somebody with so much power in large constituencies, largely unchecked if the system doesn't work effectively. And up and down the country, there have been a number of instances of decisions taken by commissioners which could have been scrutinised in a more effective way, I think, by the panels who have a duty to support commissioners, but also to hold them to account. So I think the role of the panel needs to evolve in the future to represent the public, because, as I say, it's very difficult, with the best of intentions, for any commissioner to engage effectively across such huge constituencies. But if the panels can discharge that responsibility on behalf of the public, that can help improve the whole arrangement.
John Stevenson?
To a very large extent, I do agree with Paul there that it is important that the panel does play a role in challenging the police commissioner. But the important thing about it is that the police commissioner is meant to be a high-profile person. They are elected by the people, and that is their job to take on that role. I accept that the panel needs to challenge the police commissioner, but we have a regime now where the police commissioner is meant to be a significant and important person.
John Stevenson, the Conservative MP for Carlisle, and Paul West, the former Chief Constable of West Mercia, who now runs a not-for-profit organisation called Policing for All. Thank you both very much